After years of bloodshed, there is a mood of optimism in Colombia's countryside. For years, small towns have been the battleground in the country's 6-decade civil war. But now, with a peace process with the largest rebel group nearly finished, levels of violence related to the civil war are at historic lows. You can feel the hope for the future. Santa Lucia, Antioquia. These are the small villages that have borne the brunt of the Colombian conflict. Poor, vulnerable, isolated. Like millions of other Colombians in the countryside, Santa Lucia has frequently found itself in the crossfire of the civil war. But with the optimism, there is apprehension for the future. For years, they've lived under guerrilla control, and now they aren't sure the government will be able to keep order as the guerrillas did. These farmers fear that with the FARC gone, other illegal groups may try to take its place, so setting off a new war for control of these lands. Army helicopters are a common sight here in the battlegrounds, and the sounds of their rotors, one more note in the symphony of war. But today the sound of a helicopter brings news of peace. Aboard, an image few could imagine, members of the FARC being protected by their old enemies, soldiers. The commission, made up of FARC rebels and government representatives, is here to explain to the community the peace process and what it will mean for the townspeople. Santa Lucia is close to a concentration zone, some 28 places around the country where thousands of FARC guerrillas will congregate to disarm over the coming months. Mónica Cifuentes is part of the government's peace process team.
Se acordó que íbamos a crear unas zonas veredales transitorias de normalización para que las FARC en esas zonas empiecen a hacer su dejación de armas y prepararse para la reincorporación a la vida civil.
The FARC held huge influence over towns like Santa Lucia and its people. The FARC enforced the law, or their version of it. But with peace, this must change, says FARC commander Bencos Biojo.
Porque hay una ausencia del Estado en todos los aspectos. Tú notaste desde el aspecto, inclusive del aspecto de la formación educativa, y eso se deriva también hasta los aspectos mismos del control social. La FARC de una manera u otra había acordado ya con las comunidades un mecanismo de control social. Al replegarse las FARC, esos mecanismos no tienen a dónde reportarse y desde dónde sustentar el control social.
¿Y usted confía que el Estado puede hacer este trabajo?
Debe porque si no nos estaríamos abocando al caos.
The guerrilla commander known as Erica sums up the fear of many of the farmers in these zones.
Porque yo sé que la expectativa del campesinado está en que la guerrilla sale, va a llegar el paramilitarismo, pues el gobierno ha firmado un acuerdo de lucha contra el paramilitarismo.
There is a notable increase in the army in zones like this, part of a plan to fight the criminal groups, says Mónica Cifuentes.
El presidente de la República ha creado unos consejos especiales de combate contra las BACRI. Yo creo que hay una articulación nacional de todas las autoridades, tanto de la fuerza pública, incluyendo las fuerzas militares y de policía, y de todas las autoridades locales, y están trabajando en conjunto. Ya hemos visto unos resultados muy apreciables. Le quiero decir que hay una política coherente, concreta, articulada a nivel nacional para combatir contra estas bandas criminales.
There are reasons why these lands could be the center of a worse conflict. Coca crops continue to be grown in these mountains, and who controls the coca can control the cocaine business. The FARC say that the true test of peace is whether the government can wean coca farmers off the crops.
hemos acordado con el gobierno, no solamente con el gobierno, le hemos planteado inclusive al gobierno de los Estados Unidos unos mecanismos que permitan la erradicación real de los cultivos de coca. ¿Por qué? Si tú te vas al primer punto, ¿hacia dónde está focalizado? Un campesino no va a sembrar coca si tiene alternativas reales económicas. Un campesino, nadie se va a arriesgar con 1 kilo de coca si tiene la posibilidad de acceder a la universidad y ser un profesional y ganarse un sueldo. Nadie va a meterse en esa actividad que tiene un alto nivel de riesgo y que lo margina de los elementos de legitimidad, por decirlo de alguna manera, si tiene un espacio de oportunidad.
And then the commission is off to another town to continue explaining the new process. And the residents of Santa Lucia are left to think on their future. These beautiful mountains of Northern Colombia have long been home to a brutal civil war. Far-right paramilitaries, rebels of the FARC and the ELN have all fought for this zone. Now new criminal mafias with names like the Urabeños are entering these mountains. One of the largest towns is Ituango, with a population of around 6,000.
This used to be considered a FARC stronghold, but as the peace process advances, the guerrillas are leaving towns like this behind, and that's scaring residents.
They have already noticed the difference. In the past, the guerrillas would enforce certain rules. One such law was that farmers had to leave their machetes behind when they wanted to drink. And it was effective, say locals, in bringing down the number of drunken machete fights. They also punished drug use. First-time infringers got a warning. The second time, the threat of exile. There usually wasn't a third warning. It was death. In the past weeks, the FARC have left Ituango as they make their way to the concentration zones. And since then, crimes are on the rise, says Edilberto Rueda.
O sea que aquí el incremento, digamos, del hurto, el incremento, digamos, también del consumo del vicio. No hay confianza en el gobierno, digamos, cuando tenemos desconfianza, entonces aquí no confiamos en el gobierno, porque en el pasado incumplió muchas cosas que ha prometido. Los paramilitares pueden volver acá a este territorio siempre y cuando el gobierno no ponga mano fuerte sobre ellos.
Police have increased patrols in towns like this, and the government has promised to send more police and soldiers. In towns like Ituango, the guerrillas had a shadowy power. It was in the countryside where the guerrillas ruled in the open. We wanted to see how the farmers were feeling with the peace process. And the only way would be by horse. Along the mountain path, we came across an old coffee estate that seemed to embody the recent history of this zone. It was built 90 years ago, and in its heyday, hundreds of workers buzzed around here. Now it felt abandoned.
This used to be the farm's main entrance. Here you can see the name Las Acacias, and beneath it it says Ya no vive nadie en ella. No one lives here anymore. This farm harks back to a more prosperous time, a more peaceful time. At the beginning of the 1980s, this was the center of a booming business. There was cattle, there was coffee, and then the war came. First arrived the FARC rebels. They demanded extortion. Then came the far-right paramilitaries. They committed massacres across the zone. And just like this farm, the local economy began to crumble.
Este café es una nueva...
Nearby we meet Freddy Tamayo, a coffee farmer. He believes a sustainable peace will be good for the region.
Realmente el proceso de paz ha traído tranquilidad, el ruido de los fusiles ha cesado y pues no se siente el fragor de la guerra como tal, y esperamos que los beneficios sean amplios y más en el campo, que es donde realmente se ha sentido la guerra más intensa.
But he worries that if the levels of poverty in the countryside aren't righted, more violence will come.
Porque la mayor cantidad de personas que van a engrosar las filas guerrilleras salen precisamente del campo, porque lo que hacen no tiene un valor económico que pueda suplir sus necesidades. Si les ofrecen alguna otra oportunidad, pues toman la decisión de coger las armas pensando que esa es la solución, cuando realmente no lo es.
And he's concerned that more mafias will try to take over the zone.
Si ellos se reúnen en un lugar y mientras hacen el proceso y si entregan las armas, es muy posible que otras bandas criminales o lo que queda de los paramilitares puedan insertarse en esta zona para volver a tomar la economía de los ilícitos.
In this region, the reason for the violence grows everywhere. We had to ride on the horse for some more hours to come across what seems to be the curse of the Colombian countryside: coca.
This plain-looking bush with the frankly ugly-looking green leaves could be the cause of a whole new set of problems. This is coca, the raw material from which is made cocaine. The FARC have controlled this territory for years. The question now is, what happens to the cocaine business once the FARC leave?
It is this crop more than any other that has fueled the Colombian civil war for decades. This is just one of the 69,000 hectares of coca planted across the country. Colombia is the largest producer of coca in the world, according to the latest statistics by the UN. Here we met with the coca farmer, who asked we disguise his voice. He calls his fields of coca small compared to other farmers.
Sí, realmente hay bastante coca y hay lugares donde hay mayores cantidades. Por acá no es tanta, pero realmente sí hay más coca que otros cultivos. No fue una decisión por gusto, sino porque realmente es más fácil para el campesino sacar un kilo de coca que lo puedes llevar en una mochila y venderlo, que producir cosas que sean de altos volúmenes y que cuando se vayan a vender no haya forma de sacarlo, no haya vías de acceso o simplemente no hayan compradores por la distancia.
He worries that his crop may be a tempting reason for other armed groups to move into the territory.
Los problemas son realmente mayores a los beneficios. Como la coca no beneficia solamente al productor, sino a otras personas que manejan otras flechas, los que la comercian, los intermediarios. Como ellos están peleando por el territorio, pues entonces eso atrae la violencia, obviamente, y son los mismos coqueros los que están aportando a esa violencia, aunque no lo hacen con gusto, sino porque simplemente así funciona el negocio de la coca.
Coca production is estimated to be on the rise. One person told us that the FARC warned coca farmers last year that they would be killed if they stopped growing coca. The order was dropped this year.
Sí, es un temor latente, puesto que si en una zona se presencia, en este caso las FARC, y en zonas vecinas circundantes hacen presencia, por ejemplo, los paramilitares o las BACRIM, al haber un repliegue o al haber una zona donde las FARC se van a reunir para la negociación, pues habrán otras personas que quieren retomar el negocio, puesto que es un negocio que da muy buenos dividendos, entonces siempre va a haber alguien que quiera tomar ese lugar.
We had one more interview to do. It would be far from the mountains, back in the city. We wanted to speak to someone in the drugs industry.
We've been given the green light. I'm on my way now to meet a trafficker. I want to find out what the drugs industry thinks about the peace process.
This man has had dealings with the major mafia that could threaten the FARC zone, a group called the Urbeños.
Sí, es una pandilla de puros matones, ¿se me entiende? Esa gente tiene mucho poder y sí mandan en mucha parte del mundo.
What do you think is going to happen when the FARC put down their weapons?
Yo creo que esa gente, los sureños, se van a apoderar de esas zonas. ¿Me entienden? Por tener más poder. ¿Me entienden? Entonces, como pelean a punta de bala, a punta de plomo.
Are you optimistic about this peace process?
Yo no creo en ese proceso de la paz. ¿Por qué? Porque no, porque Colombia no puede haber paz. ¿Por qué? Porque prácticamente Colombia se mueve de la droga. Entonces, si hay paz, no va a haber droga ni va a haber nada de eso, ¿cierto?
Back in the mountains, the farmers hope against hope that the government won't fail them again. They want to believe that for the first time in a generation, they can live in peace.